Welcome to today's Answers with Autumn training, which is all about the hidden risks of AI for your business. I'm lawyer Autumn Witt Boyd, and today I'm joined by another AWB firm lawyer, Katie Nelson, who is also our legal team leader. So Katie has had, I'm not sure she would say it's a privilege, but she has been spearheading our firm's AI initiative. She's been researching the risks, helping us implement a common sense AI policy, and evaluating the AI tools that we might start integrating into our administrative, marketing, or eventually client work. So a little bit of housekeeping. We are lawyers. We are not your lawyers. So nothing that we're talking about today is legal advice. This is based on U.S. law. We are both licensed to practice in Tennessee, and we do not specialize in tax or patent law. So you will never hear us talk about those two things. All right. So you are in the right place today, whether you are an AWB firm client, you're a referral partner, or you're just somebody trying to run a smart, sustainable business in 2025. You need to be here today or watching the replay. Because let's face it, AI is everywhere right now. You're probably using it, or your team is, even if they're not telling you. You might be writing website copy, using it to summarize client calls, analyzing data, or streamlining your hiring processes. So I know for me personally, these tools have been a game changer. They make things faster, cheaper, more efficient. But here's the catch. Most businesses have no idea what risks they're actually taking on when they are using these new AI tools. And AI can quietly expose you to major legal issues. So we're talking things like data privacy violations, copyright infringement, disputes with contractors, without you ever meaning to cross the wrong line. So while you're focused on leading your team, growing your revenue, delivering results to your clients, all the things you should be doing, you don't have time to read those 40-page long terms of service, which, no one even ever clicks on anymore, or chase down state-by-state privacy rules. So I get it. You are not trying to become a tech lawyer. So that is why our training today is going to be really valuable. So we are going to break down the most common mistakes we are seeing businesses make with AI tools. We're going to give you some real examples we're seeing with our clients and with our colleagues, and what this is costing them. We want to talk about where the biggest risks really lie. It is not just ChatGPT. And maybe there are some areas that you've been worried about that we think are not so important. And we're going to go over some simple updates that you can make to your policies, your contracts, and importantly, your website terms to protect your business right now. So as always, we are not here to scare you. We are here to help you stay ahead of the curve. So by the end of the session, we are hoping you'll walk away with a better understanding of what's changing super fast. And you'll know when it's time to bring in legal backup so that you can have that peace of mind that you're taking AI seriously without, having to lose your mind trying to figure all of this out. So Katie, what exactly is AI? Quick overview, and how are we seeing our 7- and 8-figure online business owners use it right now?
Yeah. So AI is artificial intelligence. Essentially, it is a computer technology that is mimicking human intelligence. So we're seeing these a lot of our clients, businesses use things kind of in a variety of ways. And like you said, it is just exploding. So you're seeing people use it through things like generative AI type functions where it is generating content, right? It may be like creating drafting things or creating logos or images. A lot of companies are using them for things like analytics. So it's kind of analyzing data or automating prompts and things kind of within your business. So there is a vast array in ways in which you can use that. Research is definitely becoming another area in which AI is becoming more evolved. It is helping to synthesize and analyze large volumes of data very quickly. So you can use that to kind of speed up research process. So the most cases that we're seeing it though pop up with our clients is in content creation, or if you're integrating it with your customer service, maybe kind of screening candidates for programs, and also just helping to speed things up and kind of take out the time that it is taking us to kind of complete some of those tasks ourselves.
Yeah, especially repetitive tasks. We're seeing a lot of clients kind of even creating agents for specific tasks.
Yes.
So if this is all I'm doing, these kind of basic uses of AI, I'm not getting into anything fancy. I am in an AI membership with Rick Mulready, and people are in there doing very fancy things. Well, let's say I'm just doing kind of the basics with AI. Is that still a risk to my business?
So Anytime, I mean, I would approach it with the mindset of like anytime that you're going to be using any sort of technology, there's going to be some like scale of measurable risk. There's never going to be no risk. So when you're looking at some things like if you're just using it as like basic internal use, your risks are going to be lower. So if you're doing things like maybe kind of automating some internal tasks, or if you're using, ChatGPT to help, you're just like, I'm just not getting this wording right. Like, help me say this a little bit more concisely, or change my tone, right? Like things like that. That's lower, but it's not zero. It's not going to be perfect. You definitely don't want to rely on those tools for things like we have seen it. It does not go well at things that require logic, like if you're looking at math problems, or if you're relying on it for any sort of facts or law. You have to remember too, as you're using these things, that it's mimicking, again, human intelligence. It is not thinking on its own. And so it is just synthesizing large amounts of data. And so the things that it's pulling, it could be out of date. The prompt you could put in could, set it to where it is going to provide you with a response that is just not true. We've seen that with hallucinations being a risk, especially in the legal profession. That has been one that we have seen a lot of attorneys have kind of gotten slapped on the wrist, that they are presenting, legal briefs in court, and it's cases that are just made up. And that's just because you asked it to provide you with something, and it did exactly what you asked it to do. It just made something up. It just was not true. So it does help you, get 95% of the way there on some things. But again, it's just that little percentage, that 5% of that risk. Like it's not 100% going to, insulate you against all of that.
Something I'll add is I've seen that this really varies depending on what tool you're using and what level of subscription you're paying for. So for example, the free version of ChatGPT is not going to be as good as the paid version, is not going to be as good as the pro version. And then there are some tools specifically that are better at like actually finding correct facts or correct law if it has access to the right databases, which not all of these databases are public. So it's not like it can just crawl them and grab them. So, the deep research tool, I have a lawyer friend who has done some comparisons and found that one is pretty good. But again, it's not 100% on the nose. And so, like you said, it's that 5% where they get it wrong, where really, really expensive problems can happen.
Yeah.
And Katie, talk about like what we are actually seeing go wrong since we're in these really early stages.
Yeah. Well, I was going to mention that is like the tools too, there's something new every day that's popping up. Like somebody has found a new fix for something, right? And it's all just so new that I think we're working through all of this, and that we haven't really seen a lot of the bad results yet, right? Like we haven't had the client contracts that have gone really bad, or the issues have popped up. So I always caution kind of like as you're, looking through those and evaluating like kind of the different varying risks that you're going to be facing with if you're using it kind of just internally, or like we said, some of the higher risks. So there have been some legal cases that have been coming up now, right, that people are using AI tools to help with applicant screenings when they're doing jobs. So they're putting job postings up online and they're having the tools help because, of course, you're going to get inundated, with applications. But what has happened now is that some of these tools have accidentally, this wasn't intentional, but they have been disproportionately like screening certain protected groups. So they're not moving forward in the application process.
And this would be like only, white males are moving forward just because of the kind of innate bias that's probably built into these tools.
It may be certain things that you have put in as far as like what you're looking for and how it's screening, and exactly that, right? Like that was not your intent when you put that. You just set up the prompt to do that. And it did what you asked, but it inadvertently has now restricted a protected group from, like you said, you have no women that are now moving forward to like the interview process, or so things like that are popping up. And what's happening is that we're seeing these cases again, right? Like they're in the very early stages, but they're moving forward, and that they're not dismissing them on the outset. They're saying, no, your company, we want to hear the merits of these arguments. This is not, you can't just say, oh, it wasn't me. I used this tool and now I'm, we didn't mean to do that. They're saying, no, you could be on the hook for that. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. It made your process faster, but now kind of look at where, you are.
It opened a trapdoor to a lot of risks. Yeah. And I think for some of these tools, it might be helpful to even think of them as a team member. Like what kind of oversight would you want to have over a team member that you were delegating this task to? Because they are becoming somewhat autonomous, but you cannot just let them run wild without potentially hitting some issues. So give a couple more examples, Katie. I know we've brainstormed a few.
Yeah. I was going to say, we'll talk about internal policies in a second, but that is definitely something that's also becoming a risk, is that people, you have team members that are using AI that you're not necessarily aware that they're doing that. And I think that's happening a lot more as people are, especially working remotely. That is definitely a big risk. I will mention one thing. So we were like getting ready to do this, and I was actually, so I have a personal example to share, because I was actually working on an employee handbook for a client. And she had asked a question around the direct deposit requirements. And so that is one area of employment law, which we know we've mentioned, like they vary by state. And so you cannot have, like some states do require that you allow your employees to be paid by alternative methods, that you cannot just mandate they're all paid by direct deposit. They have that autonomy. So in some states that's required. And so I was using one of our legal research tools to pull, and I was checking the states in which she had people to just verify which one, so I could tell her specifically. And I put it into ChatGPT and I asked, like, which states mandate, this? And the things it pulled up, it said no. It had some that it was like no requirements. And I'm like, that directly conflicts with exactly what
I'm looking at the law. Yes.
Right. And it pulled, and it was a good reminder to me too, when thinking about this training today, was that it pulls information, but the sources can always be wrong. It could be pulling from bad sources. So you don't have that oversight. So it is just so important to go through and check and look at those things and make sure that the information that you're getting is accurate.
Yeah. And I'll just emphasize again, especially when, we're lawyers, so we're looking at laws, but we have a lot of experience here. It's unfortunate. I think this will change over time, but a lot of the source material is gated. Like it's behind a paywall. You can't just Google some of these laws or some of these court cases. And so if the AI tools are even the ones that are crawling the web and trying to, get real-time information, they may not have access to the most updated, unless they are behind that paywall, like of a Lexis or a Westlaw. That was not true even a few months ago. Like some of that information was public and now it's gated. So there's a real risk of things being out of date. And like Katie said, these laws are changing all the time. So that is a very big risk. If you are using AI for compliance, I urge you not to do that, because you're opening a big door to problems.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we've seen, it's probably lower risk, I would say, to use a tool like ChatGPT or something to, write a cease and desist letter or a demand letter that you're going to send to someone. But again, it'll pull things that maybe are not applicable. And so often, we'll see these two come through sometimes, and we are like, they use something to write this, because it just does not make sense. And so
we've seen things come through our desk where someone says, my lawyer told me such and such, and we are like, this was absolutely written by AI. There is no way a lawyer would have said this.
Right. Or you'll just see the way that it's written. It is just very clear when it is like human drafted and then computer drafted. I think it's just the tone and the way in which it says certain things too. It's becoming increasingly more obvious when people are using tools like that. So that's not like a huge risk for your business, right? Like if you were to use that and do that. But again, if you're saying, that you consulted with an attorney, the person on the other end reading that is like, no, they didn't. They definitely didn't when they're looking at it. So especially if it's pulling, arguments and things that maybe, apply in that area, but not to your specific, case. So,
yeah. So talk about what we're seeing. Let's say if you're providing services, let's say you're a consultant or a graphic designer, web designer agency, and you're providing services to another company, tell me what we're seeing in that area with AI and kind of rules and regulations.
Yeah, one thing that we're seeing are additions of AI, of language addressing usage of AI being put into certain contracts. So that is always something, especially if you're hiring someone to create something, or if you're someone on that other side, creating something for other businesses, is to review the terms in those contracts and to make sure that if it prohibits your usage of those tools in that, you definitely want to make sure that you're not using something then and inadvertently now breaching your client agreement. So that is something that I would definitely, when we get to like all of our recommendations to talking about things, like circling back on just reading all of the agreements that you're signing now, because we're seeing more and more language addressing the usage of AI and prohibiting, especially.
Yeah. And I would add to that, if let's say your pricing is based on your use of AI to gain efficiency, or to, your whole process has AI built in, which we're seeing a lot of businesses start to do, that may be a negotiating point. If someone else is trying to prohibit you from using AI in your work, and you can say, well, okay, fine, but it's going to cost 3 times as much because this is my process. And if I take that out, it's kind of a different ball game.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so we may start seeing more of that.
Yeah.
All right, I will give one last anecdote of our mistakes that we're seeing. And this one drives me a little crazy. I have a lot of entrepreneur friends. And so I am hearing from a lot of them the incredible ways that they are reducing their legal spend by relying AI. And I'm not saying that it cannot be useful. I actually think it's really useful if you get a contract and let's say you don't understand some of the language, to feed it to AI and just say, like, help me understand this in plain English. Like, that's a great use of it. Or even like, give me some alternative options for such and such. But here is one thing that has come up. I was talking with a friend, and he said that he needed some revisions to his contract, but rather than calling his lawyer, he just fed it to AI to make some changes. And the I don't know what tool he was using, let's say it's ChatGPT, told him, like, identified a bunch of mistakes and problems. And he said, basically ChatGPT told me this contract that my lawyer drafted was garbage, so I'm never going to hire him again. But the things he was pointing out were like very, very minor issues, like terms not being capitalized in all the same places, or like, a term not being defined, every single term being defined. And so as a lawyer, those are things to me that are very minor, that are very expensive, frankly, for an attorney to go through a long contract and make sure like every word is capitalized, every definition is included. It makes the contract a lot longer. So those are kind of like high cost, low impact issues. So I would just encourage folks, if you are feeding things to ChatGPT, to kind of take with a grain of salt its evaluation of your lawyer's work product. Because my guess, especially if you're an entrepreneur, is that you do not want to spend $20,000 on a contract that is like absolutely perfect. Good enough is really what you're looking for as a practical matter.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that defined terms, because I had noticed that actually in a lot of times we have like with like I say older contracts, but you see very like traditional legalese written, and it has like recitals, and then it has like a whole definitions paragraph.
Whereases, yep.
Yes, and I've noticed that if the contracts don't start out that way, right? And if there's no definition section where it's like, here's all the definitions that,
which is honestly really annoying as you're working with a contract.
It will say there are no defined terms. I'm like, no. They're just defined later in a way that is easier in which to like read, and it makes sense. And as
Right.
you're like, so it doesn't, it's not perfect. It's just looking for specific things. So I always think that's funny when they're like, there's nothing defined. But no. It's just what it means defined. There's no section with that.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about some risks, some legal issues that we are seeing around AI right now with our clients.
Yeah, I'd say the 3 kind of biggest things that we're seeing is with using AI is that your confidential and proprietary information is being shared, and it's being shared with tools that may not be secure. So the tools, you're kind of giving it permission to take those things, and then they can either like learn from it, train with it, or do things with it.
Sell it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that all varies on the terms based on what it is that what tool you're using. So that is a huge risk. Along those similar lines, another risk that we're seeing is data leaks, or the way that they are collecting and storing data is done in a way that could be violating privacy laws. So you think about a lot of companies now, especially online businesses, are using things like chatbots and whatnot, to where they're having, people are putting in their names and their email addresses. And so making sure what they're doing then with that information is up to par, because you could be responsible for that. So that is another risk. And then I would say another big risk that we're seeing, it just relates down to ownership. Who actually owns what is being created if you're using these tools to create content, any sort of like images, logos, things like that, like really ensuring that you actually own it.
Yes. Okay. And talk a little bit more specifically, Katie, if you can, about those privacy law issues. Are there specific states or countries that have those higher restrictions where you need to really make sure that you're being careful? Again, we're thinking of the AI as almost another team member. So if you're handing all that over, what are the rules that we need to make sure that we're complying with?
Yeah. So if you are gathering and collecting any sort of personal information, so you think about people's like names, addresses, email addresses,
Health information,
yeah,
financial.
for
Yeah.
financials, you're getting their credit cards, all of that, then you by law are required to have a privacy policy on your website. Oftentimes privacy policies, a lot of people are like, oh, I just grabbed one from, one of my friends had one and they shared it with me. That's great. And maybe a good start, but you really have to customize those because what is really important and what is required is that you are disclosing what information that you're collecting and then what you're doing with that, right? Like, how are you using their personal information? So you have their permission then at that point to use it in the ways in which you want to use it. And so you asked if there are certain laws. There are internationally. You always hear about the GDPR. So if you have any users, website visitors that are in the EU, they have very comprehensive privacy laws, and so that is required there. And more states here. So we don't have a comprehensive like U.S. privacy law, but we do have a lot of states are popping up, and so more and more of those are coming up now. California has the CCPA that governs that data usage, and so you'll want to make sure that whatever that you're doing, that you're properly, gathering the information, storing it correctly, disclosing it, and that your privacy policies are updated appropriately to reflect all that. So you're not kind of getting into hot water.
Yeah, and really checking the privacy and data usage that you're agreeing to when you check that box when you sign up for a new tool. If they're you if the let's use ChatGPT as an example. If your customers are feeding information that's going into ChatGPT, and then they're doing something else with it, you as the business owner that collected that data on the front end, you are responsible for whatever the tools that you're using are doing with that data. So that kind of opens, again, another door to potential risk for you. So you really need to be careful with anything that touches your client or website visitor data.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then you have the risks too of like data breaches, where if any of those, tools that you're sharing, that you're gathering information and sharing that with, if you haven't disclosed that you have done that, right? And then now there's this huge data breach and these people's information is given out. I mean, that's a big risk for your business. So you definitely want to look at those terms. They are not, our firm, we love to write things in ways that very like common language, easy for everybody that's looking at it to understand, but that is not the way that a lot of these tools terms are written. Unfortunately, they're very long, but it is important to take a look at it and see kind of what if you use it, what are you giving them permission to do with the information that they're getting?
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk. I've gotten a lot of questions about AI policies. So does every business need an AI policy, or is this really only needed by like big corporations?
Yeah, so I would say it really depends on your business. So if you are a solo business owner and you're kind of running the show, you're not having any contractors, you're doing all the things by yourself. You probably do not need like an internal AI policy dictating how AI is going to be used in your company because you're the only one doing it all, right? Like it is you managing, you're running the ship. If you're hiring contractors or if you have a team that is helping you and that is using AI, then I would say at that point you need a general like internal policy for your company. Even as a small business owner, if it's just you, absolutely you would need to make sure that your privacy policy is updated, like we said. So that kind of applies regardless. So, but as for like the specific internal AI use policy for your company, once you start getting team members, contractors that you're using, at that point is when I would say is probably a good time to implement one.
And we're just completing our AWB firm internal use policy, as Katie's been working on. And our plan is to then create a contract template that will go into our contract template shop. So I would say in the next few weeks that will go live. And if you're not already on our email list, if you registered and signed up to watch this training, then you already are. But if you're watching it later or on our YouTube channel, go to awbfirm.com. Hit subscribe and you will then get a notice when that new template is released. I think a lot of companies are going to need that for sure.
Yes.
All right. So what kinds of things should be included in that AI use policy, Katie? What are the things we're thinking about?
Yeah. So what you're going to want to put in there, again, it's not going to be a one size fits all because kind of what you do, it may differ based on what your business is. But you're going to want to make sure that your policy very clearly lays out any sort of like what AI tools are approved, what AI tools are prohibited. Like, are there specific things that you're like, you know what, we have to make sure like we cannot use chat GPT, or if you say you can use chat GPT, it needs to be like this version, the company's, only their like login credentials that way to ensure that you're, not unintentionally like exposing things to um, maybe like free versions or things like that. Is that you're really controlling what it is that your team, especially how they're using it. So you want to make sure that that is very clearly outlined there. What is approved, what maybe not. You also want to lay out very clear expectations for when and how the AI tools can be used. So is it, if you're generating, if you're in a graphic design business, like maybe you would use it to automate some of your project management tasks, but you would say absolutely not. You cannot use it for content creation for our clients, right? So again, it's going to vary based on your business, but you'll want to make sure that what you have in your policy outlines what they can and cannot do, how they can and cannot use it. So that should also be laid out there. Another thing I would say to consider including in your policy is just as these things are evolving, laying out a very clear process for your team so that they understand, like if there's a new tool that they come across, what's the process then that we need to go through in order to make sure that that's approved and it gets added to the approved AI tool list, right? Like who does that need to go to for testing? Kind of what vetting are we going to do to look at it? What kind of training are we going to implement if we need to do that, depending on what the tool is? So making sure that that is just very clearly outlined, that people are not just testing out new things and seeing if they like it and then letting you know later, that it is, you have put that there for your team to know and to understand that this is kind of the process in which we're going to see something, and work on putting it into the business and then updating any sort of, privacy. You have to update, then kind of like triggers all the other things that you have to do.
Like dominoes, yes.
Yeah, once you add in a new tool. So making sure that team members are not just like testing and trying out new things without going through the right channels.
And I would say, Katie, in my mind, this could be kind of a living document because things are changing so quickly. And I know, let's say you nominate, we've kind of thought about this at the firm, nominating like one person who is our tester in chief. And they're the ones kind of playing with the new tools and deciding what makes sense for the rest of us to try out. But again, that there would be a process for that. And then as things are adopted, maybe you add them to the policy, to the list of approved items, or maybe you scratch things off if, the privacy changes or, we don't feel confident in them anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be a one and done policy that you're going to write and then kind of like sit and forget. Like it probably be best to put into some kind of, like you said, a workable document that you could have and then know, like, we're going to revisit this every quarter and see what we need to change. We always recommend like reviewing and updating privacy policies, things like that, at least annually. But if you're, using technology and changing that out more frequently, then you might need to kind of also change the timeframes in which you're reviewing all those things as well. So yeah.
And we already talked a little bit about privacy policies, GDPR. Anything else to say about that? As you're reviewing tools, and I saw we got a question in the chat, like, how do I even know what the privacy settings are when I'm looking at a new AI tool? How would I figure that out?
So typically they're laid out. I mean, the first thing I would say is to review their terms and see like before you're looking at that, because it will lay out there. And a lot of them will even have sections as far as how they use the technology. And it'll say whether or not it is just used internally for like training and education purposes, but that it is not like shared or
that it's anonymized or different ways that they might use it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
That's typically going to be, let's say you've already signed up for something. Usually you can see it right there when you're signing up, but it's almost always going to be linked in the footer of the website. Or like if you go to the settings page, you can usually find it by just kind of clicking around.
Yes. You can typically find them before you purchase anything in the footers of the tools on their websites. And see, and a lot of them now are even, I mean, it's nice that it'll spell out a little bit because these people are adding more AI language into their policies and whatnot, in terms that you can find the sections pretty easily and like look through and see kind kind of how that usage is laid out there.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll mention is that it has now become best practice, and you probably get these emails and you ignore them. But anytime a software company makes a big change to its terms or a change to its privacy policy, it will usually send out an email announcing those changes, maybe summarizing them. That is something you probably need to start paying more attention to, especially for your AI tools. And probably for most of your tools, especially if they're touching client data or customer data, because they are testing things too. They are trying things out. Maybe they weren't selling your data initially, but maybe they changed their minds. Like, they will send you an email and let you know. And if you ignore that, you may have just kind of missed a big change. So that's definitely something you need to stay more aware of.
Yeah, and a lot of those too, like you mentioned, you'll notice that it just says like continued use of the service after the states, like is your acceptance of it. So you do need to be mindful and like take a look, make sure that nothing significant's changed. And unfortunately, kind of your only solution in that instance is that if you don't like how they're using it, then you have to find a new tool. And so that is kind of what, reading the terms is always, always like the first thing that I say to go to before you are going to just try something out to make sure that, what permission also you're giving them to use with what you're giving, and seeing how they're going to use it.
And I know this may sound overwhelming. I will say most of these are a 5-minute task because they've just changed one or two things. And usually they'll point you right to the paragraph where it changed. Like, we got one from PayPal recently. I remember, I think you looked at it, Katie, and it was for individuals, not businesses. And so we were just kind of like, okay, good. Like, doesn't apply to us. Move on to the next.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be a huge ordeal.
Usually their updates are good. Yeah. They'll direct you and say like, we're making this change, and they kind of generalize it. And then you can go to the terms and like look at the paragraph to see what they're talking about.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about our client or customer contracts. So as a business, I just had a conversation with a client yesterday asking about whether we're going to update all of our contract templates to include AI usage. So as we're thinking, and P.S., we're going to do it where it's appropriate. But are there any specific terms that we're thinking about with our own clients or our own templates that we should be adding to our existing contracts?
Yes. So depending on what your business is, like you said, there may be some language that would apply for some and not necessarily as applicable for others. So things that we have been adding in for our clients, particularly for ones, if you were doing any sort of like digital resources, so online products, courses, if you have templates, putting in
memberships, group coaching. Yeah.
Memberships, exactly. Putting in language that prohibits them from sharing any of the material in using any AI tool. So they can't, take your content and then upload it somewhere because again, you have those permissions that are being granted to those tools, and the risk of your confidential, that information being shared. Things that are all behind a paywall, especially. So we are adding in language specific to that.
Interrupt you, Katie, and just mention, as a practical matter, you can have, just so people know, we can have this in a contract, and it might dissuade some people, or it might give you a way to, fuss at people later if you find that they have done this. But if you are sharing PDFs or Google Docs or other resources in digital form as part of your program, which many of us do, there is really no way to prevent this. So I think, honestly, we need to kind of presume moving forward that if we are sharing digital resources, they are probably going to end up being fed to AI tools, training models. Now, what that ends up resulting in, as we talked about in the beginning, generative AI is mimicking. It's unlikely that, ChatGPT is going to spit out your exact worksheet or your exact curriculum. But you are training them, so just the more that that's available, I think folks need to know that, like, once that cat is out of the bag, you can't put it back in.
Yeah.
What I have seen, we have at least one client recently who is running a high-level mastermind, and she sent a physical book to all of her mastermind clients with kind of the curriculum and the worksheets and the method that she's going to be taking them through in the mastermind. And I was not part of that conversation, so I'm not sharing anything out of school. But my guess is that part of that was so that it is not in a digital format that could be uploaded to AI or shared more easily. So I think we may be thinking about going back to some analog ideas if there are things that are really proprietary. If you have a certification program or something like that, where it's really confidential things that you don't want to be easily shared or easily read by AI, it might be time to think about that in a different way.
Yeah. And like you said, it may not it may not stop them from doing it, right? But what it does give you is the ability to remove them from that program and cut off their access to that information. So putting that in there, exactly that, is that it's not going to, it won't be 100% foolproof, but it'll at least give you an avenue to get that member out if you discover that that's what that person's been doing with your things.
And then talk to me about recording calls. I'm getting a lot of questions about this. I had a friend say, I had a group call and I had 15 people and 10 AI note takers on the call.
Yeah, so that's another thing that we're adding in, especially with any sort of, if it's like client services, one-on-one group things, the note takers, adding any restrictions that you cannot use, AI to transcribe, record, summarize, like they won't add them into calls, so go ahead and prohibit that. And things that we're seeing there, I mean, you have the risk too of certain states do have video consent laws, so people do have to consent to be recorded in some places. So when you have all those popping up, it raises some privacy issues on that. You also have, people that are, again, recording your material and the things that you're, discussing. So we have been just putting it in there, and people have, I think it's been pretty relatively well received. I haven't heard much pushback from clients with people that have been putting that into, especially like larger groups where they've just not allowed it. Or what I've noticed too is that people are moving into more of a webinar format so that they're not allowing the recorders to join in the calls.
Yeah. And I think it's especially important if you have a group where folks are like a mastermind, where it's a little bit more intimate and folks are sharing things about their business. The idea that someone else is going to have their own digital copy of a recording of you sharing something that you feel like it should be kept within the group, I think that's a big risk. So I think this is definitely something to consider and make sure that you set some rules about it and tell folks on the front end of any programs, in addition to putting it in your contract.
Yeah, it may not necessarily be something that's like a legal issue, but more of just people are going to be maybe a little bit concerned or weary about joining if they think that what they share is going to be, shared publicly because someone else has recorded it. So,
yeah, for sure. So we talked a little bit about how with using AI to generate content, we now have some potential copyright issues. So if I'm using generative AI, who owns the whatever the AI spits out after I put in all my prompts? So for example, let's say I use ChatGPT to write part of my website. Is that content protected by copyright? And do I even own it?
yeah. So if you not just what it spits out, right? So there has to be, like, in order to copyright something, it has to be an original work of authorship. So there has to be human authorship with it. So you cannot just take a generated logo, image, sales copy, whatever it is, and then try and protect that, right? You have to have some sort of change that you can make there, and to show that, no, this was modified and there is that human component that went into it. So yeah, that is one that it is, it's becoming a little bit trickier as people are using it to kind of like streamline, especially creating images and logos and things. Like if it's not something that you want to protect, okay. But if you do, if it's important to you and it's core to your business, then yes, you do need to make sure that you do have that human authorship component added in, especially on the end to kind of like tweak and change it.
And we're also starting to think about like keeping records. And if you ever had to go to court to sue someone for copying your content, how could you prove that it wasn't created by AI? Because I think this is now going to become a very popular defense. Like, well, I copied it, but it's not original, so they don't really own it.
Yeah.
And so you may want to start like keeping drafts or documenting your process a little bit more, especially like Katie said, for those core business assets, like an online course that you're selling or a curriculum.
Yeah. And then kind of on the other end too, with owning what's created, the other risk that you run with using that to generate that sort of material is that you could potentially be infringing on a third party's intellectual property rights. Because again, you think about it of like, these tools they're not creating something themselves, right? Like they are pulling from other images that are either on the web and things that they can scrape from. So it is not original what they're doing. They are, especially when you're thinking about images, it's pulling from others' work. So keep that in mind too, that you can, it's good to use. It can be helpful, but you can't rely on it exclusively. On the infringement aspect, there actually was just a case, I think it was last week. was this month. But Disney is now suing. Disney and Universal are actually suing an AI company for this specific thing, for copyright infringement, because they're using the characters to create images. And so I think that's one that we're going to kind of see this evolution of these lawsuits start spurring up. Because right, like now you have these tools and these characters, and these are protected images. So you definitely do not want to rely on it without verifying that there's not, if you try to search, do a Google image search, you may find one that looks very similar to what those tools popped up for you. So
Yeah, fantastic. And I want to share some lessons that we're seeing in the trademark area as well. So we were talking about copyright, which is all about protecting content. When we think about trademarks, we're protecting a brand. So logos, taglines, company names, product names. So if you're using ChatGPT to come up with a new brand name, this is very risky because, as we've been talking about this whole time, AI is trained on existing data. So if it is generating brand elements for you, they are fundamentally rooted in a pre-existing concept. So these AI tools are really bad at coming up with creative things that are totally unique and differentiated, which is what we want in a trademark. And I would say logos are really risky, just for all the reasons Katie was just talking about it, because they're pulling from pre-existing work. So we want to really strongly advise you to avoid using ChatGPT if you're wanting to create like a branding element. And then the other thing that we are seeing and that we're hearing is folks using ChatGPT to do their searching to make sure that a brand is clear to use, to make sure that it's not infringing anybody else's brand before you start using it. This is a good practice. We highly encourage everyone to run at least a basic search before you adopt a new brand, to make sure you're the first one to be able to use it. Because even if a trademark is not registered, the first user gets all the rights. So you want to make sure you're that first user. So, we're hearing things like ChatGPT said this trademark was okay to use, but ChatGPT cannot do a really good trademark clearance search. So we usually recommend that you do a deep Google search. That means going to like page 5 or 6. You want to find out if anybody's already using it, checking the USPTO database, checking your state business registry, and then checking whatever social media or content platforms that you're going to use. So YouTube, podcasts, Facebook, Instagram, all of those. Basically, wherever you're going to be primarily using the brand, you want to see who else is potentially using it there already. But the important thing when you run those searches is that you're not only looking for exact matches, you're looking for things like phonetic equivalents, so sound-alikes. We had a client years ago called MomSource who received a cease and desist from a company called CromSource, CR. Now, I thought that was kind of ridiculous, but it was a sound-alike. Now, ChatGPT is not capable, at this point at least, of finding those kinds of sound-alikes. Same things with if it means the same thing in a foreign language, that could be a potential trademark issue, or even trademarks that mean the same thing but use slightly different words. So example, here comes the sun would probably be infringing if there were a trademark for here is the sun. Like those are different words. And these all are things that kind of still require a human brain to suss out. So ChatGPT is not ready for prime time when it comes to searching and checking to see if a mark that you've come up with is clear to use. You do still need to use a little bit of that human brain. All right, Katie. Now tell me, I want to share a question that came up in our AWB firm legal subscription this week. Someone asked about is it legal basically to use ChatGPT to write parts of their site? They felt like the laws are always changing and they want to make sure that they're only using AI in ways that are legally permitted. So talk to me about that. Is there a risk of breaking laws just by using AI at all?
So as of today, I'm not aware of any laws that prohibit the use of AI in that way. What we're seeing though, like we mentioned, like there are a lot of lawsuits that are coming up. Like a lot of states are starting to develop their own laws on AI. There are lawsuits that are coming up. We mentioned Disney. There's also one with the New York Times and OpenAI. That one is around like the legality of those AI, of OpenAI using the information to like train their AI models. So we're seeing more and more of those things pop up. So like if you're using ChatGPT right now to write parts of your website, that on its own isn't illegal. But again, you will want to kind of make sure as like how you're using it is in the best way that's gonna, be what's best for your business. If it's writing sales, as we said, it's a little bit less riskier than if you're using something to create like a very branded logo or things like that for your business. So not illegal, but you may kind of want to do that too, and kind of do like a little bit of a values assessment, I would say, as you're looking at it, and determine whether or not it's something that you want to implement in your business, and then also whether or not it's something that you should then, if you're using it internally or if you're using it again with like third parties with your clients, whether or not it may be something that you probably should disclose. Like
Yeah.
when you think about us, like on the legal perspective, there's some professions, especially if you're licensed, with ethics rules that require that. So you would kind of have to, think of it from that perspective too, based on what your business is.
Yeah. And when it comes to the kind of values and just deciding, is this really where I want to use AI versus a human? Something that I am seeing come up a lot is because if you are just copying and pasting and not adding a human touch, there are kind of some signatures of AI now that make it pretty easy to spot if you used AI to generate, especially, an email response, for example. And so I think you need to be really judicious with how you're using it in your customer service, or especially if you're doing client work. How would you feel if you received an email that was very clearly created by AI? What kind of relationship do you want to have with that person? Potentially like in your sales process, is that the impression that you want to give off, or is that the foot that you want to start with? Or do you have a more high, maybe you do have a one-to-many. And so like a kind of automated seeming response is fine, versus if you have a higher touch service, you may want to just think about that a little bit harder.
Yeah, I think again, like it just depends, like you said, on the type of the business that you're in. Like if you're using AI tools to kind of like maybe speed up some of your internal systems, right, or to help with email sorting and things like that, like okay. But if you are providing deliverables for someone and you're, doing marketing or graphic design, and you have not disclosed to those people that you are actually using these tools to develop that work that you're doing, like that does kind of raise a question, about whether or not you should be transparent about it. And it would be something to look at as more and more like lawsuits are popping up, whether or not you're not just, violating your contract with that person, but also, any intellectual property risks that you've now kind of opened up and things like that. So just depending on how you're integrating it, I think it's just going to be a judgment call and a value call based on you and your business.
Yeah, I will say a few years ago, this was right at the beginning of when AI was starting, when the tools were starting to become more available. We had a contractor working with us, and I received some work product that I was like, I'm 99% sure this was copied and pasted from ChatGPT. And it was just obvious, and it was shoddy. And we ended that relationship because it was not what we had hired them to do, not our expectation. So it can definitely have repercussions for sure. I want to just mention, you heard me mention our new legal subscription a minute ago. So if you haven't heard about that, stay tuned. We are currently in our beta round. We're testing out different features and benefits. It combines our contract templates and legal support. And we'll be sharing more information about our next opening soon. Again, if you want to make sure you don't miss it, you want to be on our newsletter list. And if you're specifically interested in the subscription, you can get on the wait list, which is awbfirm.com/waitlist. I'll ask Rachel to drop that in the chat for those who are watching live. So Katie, we're going to start to wrap up. I know we might have a few questions, and we'll save time for that. So what should someone do if they're using AI, or they want to start using more AI tools? What are your takeaways if someone wants to make sure they stay legally protected with these tools?
Yes, I would say to make sure that you're really protected, kind of your call to action, the things that you should step away from today and kind of inventory in your business is to, first thing, like inventory how your team is using AI, how you're using AI, what tools you have. Evaluate whether or not you need that internal policy if you don't already have one, and make sure that if you are using tools, that usage is very clearly outlined there, and any restrictions or limitations you have on it too. If you don't have a privacy policy, you should get one if you're collecting personal information. And then you should make sure that also accurately reflects any AI usage, any data sharing that's happening there. And then the last thing I would say to look at would be your client agreements, either things that you have if you are signing any like third-party contracts per se, or ones that you're presenting to people, updating all of those and making sure that if you want to restrict usage of AI in any of your courses, programs, with your clients, things like that, to make sure that that's specified there. If you're hiring any contractors, people to provide deliverables, you may be reviewing their agreement, but you may want to check and see if there's any language around the use of AI as they're providing services. And if there's not, maybe add that in. Also take a look at like content ownership, I would say, on those.
Yeah, and I'll just give a plug. I think a lot of folks don't realize how negotiable most contracts are. And so this is something we talk about a lot with our clients. You're hiring a contractor, they send you their contract via DocuSign. That doesn't mean it's necessarily set in stone. And you probably don't want to bloody up everything, but if there's one or two things you really care about, especially if it's a more personal relationship, then you can absolutely ask for changes. So it's very normal.
And the worst thing they can say is no. And if it's something that's important to you and they say no, then you can decide whether or not that's someone that you want to go forward with working with. If you're asking them like, hey, I want to hire you to do this, but I want to make sure that you're like, that we're not going to use AI to create it. And they're like, no, I don't want to add that in. Then that's probably a red flag to you to say that they're probably using AI to do it. So that's just like you said, you can always ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you kind of my 2 rules that I am kind of keeping in mind, and I think we are going to integrate in our firm's AI policy, is to use AI. Number 1, use AI tools at the beginning and end of your work, but you need to be humaning in the middle. So let it help you research or brainstorm in the beginning, so you're not looking at that blank page. Do your humaning in the middle, and then use it at the end to proofread. So everything in between really needs that human brain. And then number 2, don't ask AI a question that you either don't already know the answer to or can't quickly and clearly verify, because it could be hallucinating and making things up. All right. So for everybody here live, we're going to open it up for Q&A. And if you're watching a replay and you have a question, reach out to our firm. You can always send us an email to info@awbfirm.com if there's something you need support with. And quickly, for our live attendees, we have a bonus for you since you stayed till the end. So we are offering a 30-minute on-air legal coaching call. This will be posted on our YouTube channel, but you'll get answers to your questions and actionable steps that you can use immediately. I've been doing these with our legal subscription members, and I've just been absolutely blown away by how much we are able to accomplish in 30 minutes to really kind of set them on their way to getting legally protected. Well, of course, we'll promote your business when we share the replay. We are going to have limited spots, so this is a real rare chance to get real results and hopefully inspire others by sharing your journey. So again, just shoot us an email to info@awbfirm.com. Give us a couple sentences about your business and one legal question that you would like help with. All right, I'm going to switch to our live questions. So some of these we may have hit on as we went. So Kristen asks, how can a business decide whether to use the paid version or the pro version? I think she's talking about ChatGPT is my guess, because I know those are some of the levels of subscription. From a legal perspective, is there a clear benefit to using pro, which is the higher level, or do all paid versions offer the same protections and controls? So Katie, I will toss this one to you. And I think this really could be generalized to any tool, this question.
Yeah, I would say look at the terms and see what they say. See if they differ for the different versions. They may have like different protections or different permissions based on which level you're in. But kind of a general rule, I would say that any sort of like paid or pro version is going to be better than free. You're probably going to have, more restrictions on, or they'll probably get more permissions if it's something that's free. So you'll be able to, I would look at that in the terms though, but that's the first place I would go to see and evaluate which option's better.
And I will say, I've been pleasantly surprised. Like, I'm using a new AI tool. I haven't run it by our committee, called Whisper, WISPR, which is a dictation tool. Yeah, and it's fantastic. And I'm just using the free version. And you better believe I pulled up the terms because I'm using it all day long, really, to help me. I type over 100 words a minute, but I talk a lot faster. And I checked the terms, and even the free version, they made it very clear, like, we are not selling your data. We are not training our model on your data. Now, again, I'm going to watch for that email when they maybe change that, because at some point they'll probably have to monetize. Yeah, you may be surprised that even some of the free tools that you may be looking into have some protection, but keep an eye out as that might change. All right. MK asked, what kinds of legal disclaimers do you need to include if you're using AI externally So if you use it for a website or store product copy, or if you use an AI generated image on a product, a book cover, I can imagine this could be a blog post or social media post. Are there disclaimers that you need to kind of let people know that you are using AI just in your content, Katie?
I wouldn't say necessarily a disclaimer, like if you're talking about for your own website per se.
Or I guess this would be more of a disclosure, just letting people know.
Yeah, you could let people know that you're using those things. But again, I think more of the risk is on the like kind of what you're gathering on the personal information side, like we talked about with privacy policies. And then what was the second part? You were asking about the content.
Yeah, I think just using it in any kind of content. And I'll tell you where I'm seeing this pop up is some folks just kind of ethically feel like they need to disclose it if they are using AI to as part of their content creation process. But there's certainly, we talked earlier about what are laws around your personal AI use. There are no current laws requiring, that I'm aware of at least, requiring that disclosure. I do know some social media platforms require disclosure. So like I know Instagram, I think you have to check a box or click on a link. If you have AI generated images, you have to disclose that. But that's really, again, part of their terms. It's not a law, but as part of your agreement of using the platform, they ask that you disclose that in certain situations.
Yeah, I think like your internal use, not necessarily. If that was something that you were creating for another party, like if it was one of your clients and you were providing that sort of information, then yeah, then like ethically, like we were talking about, maybe wanting to disclose that and let them know that you did use AI to generate that content.
And then I would say, again, best practice to do an infringement check if you're using any kind of AI generated image for something like even on social media, but certainly on something like a book cover or like a product. Because we are seeing, you can give the AI image creators are getting better and better, but you can give it a prompt and it can spit out something that looks awfully similar to something that already exists. So that could potentially open up that door to some risk.
Yeah, and just because you disclose, like if you did use it, doesn't mean that you're able to use it. It's still you still could be restricted to use that, especially if it's a book cover, something you're trying, to if you want to protect anything, any images. So
Yeah, and we actually haven't. I've been emailing with someone about this just this week. These things typically, these image infringements, don't come up for years. Like you will think you're fine, nobody said anything, and then 3 years later, you get a cease and desist letter out of nowhere, asking you to pay thousands of dollars because you have used an image without someone's permission. So it's a very avoidable problem to just make sure. And now there are so many great image resources available, stock photography, stock graphic sites. And then I know most of us use Canva. If you're using the paid version of Canva, there are so many things that you can do and create, and that's all like pre-cleared. So you're not going to be infringing anybody else, although they are now building in an AI tool. So that may be changing if you're using the Canva AI that you could accidentally infringe. So just, again, keep that in mind. All right. Well, that is the end of our questions, I believe. All right. Thanks, Katie. Have a great rest of your day.
thank you.